Quotation from myself, segment 33, quotation number 381. Most of us sooner or later realize that we cannot, for whatever reason, change and become what we, rightly or wrongly, perceive to be the desirable ideal. To reconcile ourselves with this failure and to alleviate this disappointment it produces, we, instead of continuing stubbornly to pursue an unattainable ideal, change the ideal itself and choose, of course, the one which is easiest for us to reach. We proclaim what we already are to be the ideal. Some, the most self-centered and self-assured ones, even use it as a point of departure. But then they have to convince others, spending sometimes their entire life doing so, to accept it as true. 382. Listening to some Jewish humorists and comedians whose sole purpose of writing or being on stage seems to be to laugh at or even to viciously ridicule everything Jewish, trying apparently to ingratiate themselves with largely anti-Semitic audience, one is moved to wonder if, in another time, in other circumstances, that would have also laughed all the way to the guest chambers. 383. Our prejudices are much stronger than our convictions. For while the first are the product and expression of emotions, the second are the result of reasoning. But as perception always precedes understanding, so feeling and emotion precede reasoning in the process of one's personal development. Thus the prejudices, which are again produced by emotions, are acquired early in life than convictions, which are the outcome of reasoning, and it takes a lot of living for the power of reasoning to reach its full maturity. Thus, being older in time, the prejudices are more deeply embedded in our psyche, and that much more difficult to erase or to change. Also, reasoning, being by its very nature a manifestation of the universal, would be appealed to and relied upon to change our conviction. But the language of emotion is highly individual, which makes communication of feelings difficult, especially when attempts are being made to convince others to feel any different than they already do. Again, using the language as a metaphor, the prejudices can be compared to a mother tongue, which we learn easy without thinking in early childhood, while the conviction will always remain a foreign language, no matter how well we master it. One could learn and unlearn several foreign languages, but the mother tongue is the only one that stays always with us. That is why even the most progressively thinking and politically correct individuals are not completely immune to the incurable disease of the most vicious prejudices, this beast of hate and injustice raising its ugly head, often against their will. To suppress these base and primitive emotions lurking in the depths of our subconsciousness require constant vigilance and never-ending struggle with ourselves. 384. A gentle person cannot act viciously, even if he knows that under the circumstances this is the only right thing to do. And vice versa, a vicious person, as a rule, cannot act gently, even if he is convinced that in a given situation he has no other choice. The very nature of each personality takes over and overrides the knowledge and conviction that contradicts it. The amount of psychological energy which has to be spent to overcome the natural inclination is too great for any human being to possess it continuously and at all times. 385. The only way to be, if not loved, by at least tolerated by everybody, is by being a total failure. 386. Contrary to the popular mythology, America is not a melting pot of diversities, but has always been and still is a pressure cooker of conformity. 387. The horrific, unprecedented in history persecution of Jews by the German fascists had its roots not only in the Nazi ideology, but also, and perhaps primarily, in the German imperialism. As Germany was preparing for a second time in the 20th century to seize the land belonging to her neighbors, it had to find ostensible justification for such a predatory behavior. For humans, having conscience, always have to justify the injustice they do to the others. In this particular case, the German imperialism used the claim of German racial superiority, the cornerstone of German fascist ideology, as a justification for its expansionist policy. But what is inherently unjust can never be fully justified, not for a long time anyway. There are always some little exceptions which destroy the seemingly perfect argument. The Jews were such an exception to the German claim of racial superiority. For there was too much Jewish blood in German veins after more than 1,000 years of coexistence on the same territory. What if all this alleged German intellectual, artistic, scientific, industrial, etc. superiority was a product of Semitic genetic material? The very possibility of such a conclusion, considering the fanatic belief the German fascists had in the racial determinism, must have horrified them. The German imperialists could not accept such an interpretation either, for it would have deprived them of legitimization of the imperialistic conquest. If the German race was not superior, what right did it have to grab somebody else's territory? Thus, both the German fascists and the German imperialist, which wasn't always the same, had to uphold the myth of German racial superiority. Seeing the Jews as the main obstacle to such a claim, they have solved this particular Jewish problem in a very simple, even primitive, but very effective way. The Jews have been declared to be inferior race. As such, of course, it was proclaimed that not only the Jews could not have improved German race, but just the opposite. They have contaminated it, using the familiar and convenient dichotomy of good and evil, the first coming from God, the second from Satan. All the positive qualities of the German people were attributed to German Aryan blood, and all the negative to the poisoning by the Jewish Semitic blood. For the German fascists, who prided themselves on being men of action, and despised those who, to paraphrase Mark Twain, were always complaining about the Jews, but never did anything about them, the next logical step was to cleanse the German blood from the Jewish poison, to make the Germans pure again, and thus to show the world that nobody but the German race is responsible for Germany's greatness. The rest is history, the bloody and horrible one, the name of which is the Holocaust. 388. To give a man a goal, a dream, and then to withhold from him the means of its fulfillment is a supreme act of cruelty.